Hey guys, how are you? It's Chris, the Urban Bourbonist, coming to you live here from the Urban Bourbon Bunker. I'm going to be doing some tastings of Sonoma Distilling Company tonight, and expecting a special guest to come in, which looks like he's already here. So let's bring him in. Hey everybody, thanks for joining.
Hi there.
Adam.
Technology.
Technology, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Doing very well. Thanks for joining me. Let me introduce you here to everyone that's coming into the room. This is everybody. This is Adam Spiegel. He is the founder and head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. So Adam, it looks like maybe you're okay. You were frozen up there, I think, for a second. You're in.
It should be good. Sorry, my
Ah.
fingers.
No worries, no worries. Thanks for joining me. I was just telling everyone who you were, the founder and head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. Very cool.
That's correct.
So, how's your day been so far today?
Well, got to work at about 6:30. Ran about 3 stills until about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and then jumped in a car and got here as fast as I could. I'm actually calling you from my house, so it's
Very
you
cool.
can tell from the white backgrounds. It's
Well, I appreciate you jumping on. Yeah, I've got the concrete background here in my condo. So
you got it down, man. It's all good.
yeah. So tell me and tell everyone that's watching here. Tell us a little bit about like your background and like what led you to making whiskey.
Yeah, no. First of all, obviously, I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
You know, I started my business up in 2010. I was sort of the fallout of the financial crisis. So, you know,
Okay.
like a lot of people in 2008, 2009, you know, I lost my job with hundreds of other people at a firm. I was working in financial sales. I was never really the guy pushing the buttons, more like making the phone calls.
Yeah.
And you know, I lost my job in 2008, and I'm literally sitting there in the parking lot that day, and I came to the realization that A, I didn't want to work for anybody else ever again, and B, I was really excited to learn a skill set because I really felt like, you know, I didn't know what I was going to do when the world comes melting around, you know?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
so I came to the realization that I wanted to make something. I want to make something with my hands. And so I started making beer. Beer turned to wine. Wine turned into grappa, kind of the gateway drug of sorts. And then eventually grappa sort of begat whiskey. And
Okay.
so started making that in a garage in Santa Rosa with a friend of mine. That was 2008, 2009. And by about 2010, we kind of came to the realization that the stuff we were making, we thought was better than what we were buying in the market.
Yeah.
And so we said, why don't we go live? Why don't we make this real? And unfortunately, back in 2010, there really wasn't anybody doing this. So, we were the 15th distillery in California, and now there's about 110. And we were within the first 200 distilleries in the United States, and now there's about 2,000,
Yeah.
1,800.
Yeah. Huge boom.
So it was really exciting times because it was sort of new and fresh. And, you know, I went to the American Distilling Institute, and I you know, went to some classes there, and I went to some conferences in Kentucky, and there was 150 people there.
Yeah.
And I got to be really close friends with a lot of distillers who I look up to and appreciate. You know, people like Rick Wassman and Nicole Austin and you know, Drew from Willet, and it was this really fun sort of dynamic time because we were all just like, yeah, this is what we're gonna do, this is what we're up to,
Yeah.
and some people have been doing it for a while, and so I was just really sort of I jumped in head first. I loved it from day one. You know, it was something about running a still, and back then, you know, I was running a little 125 gallon still when we first started. It would take 20 hours to run it because I had an undersized burner I was using. So you start to really appreciate, the little things because sort of I founded a nano distillery at that time, originally called 1512 Spirits. And then myself and an old business partner founded it together. And then by 2013, we sort of went our separate ways. And I rebranded Sonoma County Distilling back then, which is now Sonoma Distilling Company. So we sort of took a different direction. I decided to expand operations. I took what we were doing on a very nano scale and I think really made it micro. And now we're just making whiskey. I mean, that's the fun part is that, we don't make gin or vodka or rum or anything else. I really stayed focused the last almost 10 years now, 10 years in
Yeah.
February, to just one thing that I think is going to take me the rest of my life to really master.
Well, congratulations on that. I mean, finding your way to whiskey making and something that you love after losing your job in 2008, and still now here in 2019, you're still there doing it. So
Yeah,
that's pretty
still
cool.
here, still
Yeah.
here, baby.
So
Uh,
tell me this. What's your connection to why Sonoma? Why are you making whiskey in the middle of wine country?
Yeah, really good question, and an obvious one, right? Most people do wine or they're doing beer in our area, and for me, Sonoma County is perfect for beer and wine for very similar reasons to why it's good to making whiskey. I was born and raised in the Bay Area, so the
Okay.
proximity to San Francisco, which was my hometown, was an easy one. I was living in the city up to about 3, 4 years ago, and I was commuting north every day, literally for long hours. I can't tell you how many times I slept in a Burger King parking lot. But the reality is that when you find an area that makes a lot of sense to you, it just sort of clicks. And Sonoma County it's hot and cold. It gets really beautiful coastal influence because we're right near the Pacific Ocean. The
Yeah, yeah.
distillery I founded is 15 miles away, so I get that beautiful fog that settles in the valley every morning. And just like with wine grapes, it hydrates and it brings, a little salinity and salt and sort of the kiss of the Pacific Ocean. And it does the same thing for whiskey too. I mean, it
Yeah.
makes our barrels contract and the whiskey sort of goes in. It's also not super dry. It's a little bit wet just because of the proximity we have there. So, we're not getting a ton of angel share where we do get a lot, but we're not getting as much as someone who lives in a much more inland, more dry area. So that
Yeah.
the coast also does a good job of temperature correcting as well as also kind of keeping the barometric pressure to be a little bit more, manageable. And then also we're just in Sonoma County. So my ability to drive to a Lagunitas or Russian River Brewing Company and see sort of these iconic powerhouses in my area,
Yeah.
that's just such a unique thing to do too. And these guys started small as well. So for me, it's such a dynamic and fun and playful area. Everyone really works well together. We get a chance to talk and collaborate. They say that a lot of good wine comes from drinking a lot of good beer. I think a lot of good whiskey comes from drinking a lot of good wine and beer, and it's all just sort of coming together the right way.
Isn't that right? Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
cool. So when you started out, I know you said you took some classes at the American Distilling Institute, and did you have like also somebody that was like a mentor to you, someone that sort of helped walk you through getting things going, that was like experienced in distilling?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, lucky for me, my old business partner came from sort of a family history of distillation. So he had sort of the basic level of understanding of what we were doing. So he really sort of was the original sort of seed that started this whole beautiful tree that is my whiskey career at this point. And then in 2013, when we went our separate ways, I actually started working with Hubert Jermaine Rabon, who is, I think, one of the most iconic brandy makers in the U.S. Took a lot of French techniques and made this iconic brandy in Mendocino County, which is just north of Sonoma County. So I've had access to both my old business partner, I've had access to Hubert. I also worked with a woman named Nancy Fraley, who they call the Nose.
Huh.
She's another Bay Area person too. So I've had this really great chance to have like all these master distillers and master blenders sort of come into our shop. And I appreciate you mentioning that I'm a head distiller and not a master distiller because, even though I've only been doing this for 12 years unprofessionally, 10 years professionally, I feel like I've been lucky enough to be surrounded by master distillers, but I'm just not there yet. I'm working really hard. I distill every day.
Yeah.
I'm blending whiskey every day. but I just think it's going to take me another 12, 15, 20 years to really sort of get to that next plateau where I feel like, yep, I've amassed enough knowledge. Now I'm definitely a master distiller. And so, I've been lucky to have those people around me, and I read a lot of books. I deal with a lot of, chefs and other influences. And I think cross training is super good for what I do. And there's no better area than Northern California.
No, man, you've got everything right there where you have it all. So it's great. Yeah. Well, you seem very, very humble about it, which is really cool. Tell me a little bit about what we're going to be tasting tonight. You sent me 4 samples.
Yep.
And these are like the 4 main whiskeys that you're producing right now, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we sort of have our 2 flagships, our 2 main stage, which are Sonoma Rye and Sonoma Bourbon. And then I also sent you over our Cherrywood Rye. And then I thank you very much. And then I also sent you a new batch of Cherrywood Smoked Bourbon, which I just blended all but about a month and a half ago. So we do these things called Distiller's Editions, which are seasonal releases. They come out either in the spring or the fall. So you actually have both the spring and the fall release in hand.
Very cool.
So I figured I'd just give you a chance to taste them. We do occasionally release a wheat whiskey as well, which are our Sonoma wheat. We don't currently have any of that really circulating. It's sold out fairly quickly. And then we also do a black truffle rye, which comes out in about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
I'll send you a sample of that when it's ready. It's a fun, very sort of niche, I actually use real black truffles and infuse them into a fully aged rye whiskey. It's
wow, that's amazing.
Really fun and also sort of a nice culinary, tint on all this, or tilt on all this. And I have a single malt coming out in a couple years. I haven't really figured out when. It's only 3 years old now. I haven't decided when it gets birthed, but we are, as again, focused on the whiskey category. So I think what you have today is the best representation of what we make. We'll definitely start with a Sonoma Bourbon. That's gonna be the very first thing I throw in the glass. I'm actually gonna grab my glass.
All right, so we'll start off with that. I'll show this to everybody. And for everybody that's joined in since we started, this is Adam Spiegel. He is the founder and head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. He's been doing this since 2008, and officially started, I think, Sonoma Distilling in 2010. Is that correct? Like the official date. So let me just pop this bourbon open here, and we'll get to it.
Yeah, and I always start with bourbon. It's been a nice, interesting question that people will ask is, do you start with your rye? Do you start with your bourbon? I've done both over the years. I think the bourbon, especially now with sort of the way we went through a little bit of a rebrand and repackaging about a year and a half ago. So if anybody who doesn't recognize our old packaging, we used to call our bourbon West of Kentucky. Now we just call it Sonoma Bourbon. West of Kentucky was my way of initially sort of telling the world that you can make bourbon outside of Kentucky. It was like, it's a big no-brainer to people who understand, whiskey and in particular bourbons.
Yeah.
But, for everybody else, they're like, oh, well, you can't make it. You're in California. And I was like, well, I can. So I threw a Golden Gate Bridge on the front, and I had to call West of Kentucky, and I had several different series. I had a 1, 2, and 3. The number 2, which is our wheated bourbon, which is in the glass, is the highest seller that we had, so I sort of made it my Sonoma Bourbon.
Okay.
I really like traditional style bourbons, so this is a wheated bourbon. So
this is
70% corn, 20.
Yep.
Please.
Go ahead.
So 70% corn, 25% wheat, and then 5% malted barley. So I mirrored this one rather than going in a different direction. This one is really meant to be an iconic sort of traditional style. If you think of like a Weller Antique, which is really what I modeled this off of, becomes pappy in later years of one's life. It depends on when you buy it. But Weller Antique, it's a wheated bourbon, really nice. Has a nice doughy sort of buttery nose on it. Has a little bit of that sort of burlap sack sort of grassiness to it. This is sort of like, I've had a long day. I've been running my stills. I want to sit on my deck, hang out with my daughter, and just have a glass of whiskey. And that's ideally sort of the image I'm conjuring in my brain as I go to put this into a bottle.
I love that. This on the nose, I really get like a real bready aroma on the nose. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Definitely lots of red. I do get like some corn coming through,
Hmm.
definitely.
Some of that breadiness also comes from the fact we do open top fermentations and we do
Oh,
grain in fermentations. So we use what we consider a sweet mash. We use a fresh yeast every time we go to make our bourbon. So
yeah.
that yeast is highly effective. It ferments all of the sugar out. So this will also have a bit of a semi-dry flavor profile to it. So in our mash cooking process, not only do we not denature any sugars in the actual cooking of our mash, it's sort of an intention approach, but we also fully ferment all the sugars and turn into alcohol. So
Very
again,
cool.
I think it's sort of in a California tilt on bourbon. You know, there is a corn sweetness you can't obviously do away with.
Right.
But for me, if I'm going to pair this with food, I really do need that dryness. I need that semi-dryness, that roundness on the back end. And so that's sort of what I was initially thinking when I wanted to set off to make bourbon is like, well, let's sort of make it California style. Let's make it a bit
I like it.
drier, put it into cocktails a little easier.
Yeah, that's very cool. So it's 92 proof. What are you proofing this down from? Can you say like
Yeah, totally.
what is it coming out of the barrels at?
Well, that's an interesting thing because what we do is because I was sort of trained by a cognac maker, we do things a little differently. We do what's called a double barrel process,
Okay.
which means we take the spirit straight out of a still. We proof her down to the original entry proofs. Ours are a little lower than Kentucky's because I'm not worried about uber efficiency and my storage. You know, I'm not trying to get, as many barrels into a barrel room as possible.
Sure.
I also had to find the right sort of blend of alcohol proof and strength. And that's sort of based off your geographic locations and altitude and the barometric pressures and all sorts of stuff. And where we settled working with Nancy Fraley, we settled on the entry proof on this about 114 and a half, almost 115
Okay.
proof. Goes into a barrel of that proof. As I say, we don't get a ton of angel share, do we do get some. It's keeled, so we get water and alcohol evaporating out of the barrel. So it usually generally stays where it's at, though it will sometimes raise up a little. And then
Okay.
after we take the spirit when it's fully aged, sort of reach the top of the hill, I'll take it, I'll proof it down with water, and I'll rebarrel it again. So that's called the double barrel process.
Okay.
Um, the biggest thing is I'm not trying to over oak it. So I feel like a lot of American whiskeys, especially a lot of craft whiskeys, just taste like wood. And my goal has always been to have it be a balancing act. You know, it has the wood tannins in there, has nice vanillins and English toffees. You can sort of taste the underlying grains. And so we do a double barrel process on all of our whiskeys. So that's the Sonoma Rye, Sonoma Bourbon, all of them. So really, whenever they're done, whenever they reach the top of that hill, you proof it down with Cobb Mountain spring water, which is our local spring source, and
Okay.
proof it down to about 109. You rebarrel it again. And then actually going from barrel strength to bottle strength, we use what's called the Boisé du Fortifie, which is a fortified water. So I actually use barrel aged water, which is
Huh.
fully aged spirit that we rebarrel again at a much lower proof with a ton of water in it. And that's what we use to proof it down from barrel strength to bottle strength.
Wow, this is amazing. I mean, this is such cool information to know. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
really, it
it's hard
seriously
to put it all
is.
in a bottle. That's why it's like,
Yeah.
it's sort of hard to know what's the sort of nice balance. I figure for you and the people watching this, they probably want to know a bit more than other people might. And for me, this double barreling process just makes sense.
Yeah.
How often do you feel like whiskey sort of tastes stratified? You taste something one time, you taste it another time, it just tastes different. And so what's nice about using the blasé is that it sort of doesn't shock the spirit because it's already been introduced to the water early
Yeah.
on. So to me, it
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
no-brainer. But others,
Wow.
it just yeah, it's sometimes eludes other people.
That's really cool. Well, I'm going to taste this for the first time here. Cheers again for sending the samples. It's got a nice, beautiful color on it. And cheers.
Cheers to you as well. Thank you.
Wow, this is like nothing I've ever had. This was like a blast of like almonds and vanilla and like coffee almost even too.
Yeah. And some of that has to
I've
do with I think some of the soft woods you get from the double barreling and from the barrel aged water. Some of that has to do with just the pace in which we do our our proofing. It also has to do with the fact we're also distilling bourbon out of a pot still, which is incredibly unique. And it's not a hybrid pot still, it's an actual traditional pot still. So we actually have 5 stills in house. We use Foresights, which is our main wash still. It's a 3,000 gallon still we used to use. And now we're also using 4 250 gallon Limbics. So there are no plates. There is no over rectification. The goal is to give you highly viscous, full body, sort of like chewable whiskey. And so I think all these flavors sort of get unlocked in your mouth. That's sort of the goal of highly viscous whiskeys, is that like your mouth is going to do a good job of sort of proofing it down and letting you sort of taste all these unlocking flavors.
I tell you, honestly, I've not tasted anything like this, and the finish on this it's like going on forever.
Yeah.
Which is,
and if you add a little bit of water to
awesome.
it, just watch the oils dance in there too. I appreciate you for saying that, because it's just, I feel like whiskey should be sort of to a certain extent like an onion. You're just supposed to pull them apart in your mouth and just sort of keep on tasting layer upon layer. No short finishes here. It's just
Man,
whiskey.
I just took one sip and it's still going. This is really nice.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, you can put into cocktails if you like. I have no aversion to people adding this to their favorite cocktails or not. As far as I'm concerned, you own the bottle. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. So,
Oh, I like that.
yeah.
So I'm just going to reintroduce you again here because a bunch more people have jumped on. Everybody,
Hi.
this is Adam Spiegel. He's the founder and the head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company in Sonoma County, California. It's been in business for about 10 years now, and we just tried the first of 4 whiskeys that we're going to try tonight, and this is the Sonoma Bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
It's 92 proof. It's a wheated bourbon, and I'll tell you, it's like nothing I've ever tasted. It's really unique. A lot of different flavors in there that I don't typically taste in a lot of other whiskeys. So this was an awesome to start. I can just imagine what we're going to go to next, man. This is good stuff.
So bourbon start. I have us going to Sonoma Rye next. Sonoma Rye was sort of my first love. I have my big bottle, little bottle. Sonoma Bourbon was my original love because we sort of set off to make a different type of bourbon, a different type of rye whiskey. We didn't want to make rye that had corn or barley, largely because we felt like other people were doing it, and it made the rye whiskey sort of taste a little bit like a bourbon. And so if you go back to sort of like to traditional European style of whiskeys or whiskeys, or could almost be not called whiskey, sort of an eau de vie style, you really want to bring out the sort of essence of the rye. And so for me, I really love that sort of like rye bready, sort of like crisp, burnt edge flavor profile. And so when you add corn to rye whiskey, it sort of tastes a little bit like a bourbon. If you add barley, it sort of tastes like a single malt. And so to make 100% rye, I didn't want to make it 100% raw rye because I felt like that just didn't have enough depth to it. And so I made it 80% unmalted rye with 20% rye malt. The unmalted rye historically came from Canada, and that's why it still says Canada on the bottle, though the majority of it now is actually coming from California, the raw rye. We get it from about 70 miles away from the distillery. It's a Merced rye, so it's a nice California varietal of rye, which is not very plentiful the rest of the country. And then the 20% rye malt actually comes out of the UK. So there's a beautiful floor malting facility about 40 miles due west of London City. And I've been using that one now for almost 10 years. And it's great. It's great. So it gives a really beautiful sort of hazelnut, chocolatey back note. You get that rye bread up front. You're going to have some nice chewability to this whiskey. So the goal, of course, is to sort of sit there and gnaw on it for a little while, get that sort of Kentucky chew going on.
I got to tell you, right on the nose, I get like buttered rye bread on the nose. Like just a loaf of fresh buttered rye bread.
Yeah, we do whiskey dinners every once in a while, and I got sort of dorky once. I was fairly a little intoxicated too, I guess. But we were sitting there at the table, and they had put down some fresh bread, and I decided to like take some freshly churned butter they had in the middle there, and next thing you know, I was making like rye butter to put on bread, and it just got really dorky and really, but it was just like it worked really well. I don't know, just the fat of the butter, and I don't know. I love the pliability of this whiskey. This is what I use as the base for the black truffle rye as well. I just choose different barrels, the very sort of hand curated barrel selection for that, just because of the marrying with truffles. But this is our normal release. We've been selling it for years. This is my baby.
Man, this is again. So with the bourbon, I had flavors that I don't typically get, and now this aroma is like nothing I've ever smelled before from another, even 100% rye. This is like, it's just a massive loaf of buttered rye bread. I love it.
Cool.
All right, cheers. I'm gonna take this down.
Please. We leave the ABV a little higher on this one. That's at 93 proof. Again, just like my theory on cocktails here, I have absolutely no problem if you want to add ice or water to these things. You know, you can always add water, you can't take it out. So it's like once it's in there, I can't do anything with it. So I think this gives a bit more pliability with it being a little higher alcohol levels.
Wow, this is really, really tasty. A lot going on. It's really complex. And again, it's got a nice, really long, extended finish where a lot of stuff is happening. Tasting vanilla, like white pepper, some kind of dried fruit in there, nuts.
I usually say apricot. It's usually
Okay.
that stone fruity sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you could come see our distillery, which we do offer tours and tastings at on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but if anybody comes and sees that, you smell a fermentation going, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's where it comes from. I wish I could make it up, but it's just like you get esters on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of complexity, really good. I got to take another sip here.
Please. I like to marry this one with a really good like manchego cheese, you know, a really nice Parmesan cheese would do fine with it too. You know, usually like a good sort of like chutney or like a jam would do fine with that as well. Some nice Ritz cracker on the backside of it. Got no problem with that.
Man, so good. And that sip was just an explosion of that, like, that dried apricot flavor. And then lots of nuts come in after that. And then the finish is a lot of like baking spices almost. I don't know what, but there's kind of like some baking spices towards the end. So
A little bit of allspice, yeah. It's all sort of there. It's fun too. It's just like, you know, I want something that's floral and fragrant and spicy, and it's a good base for a good cocktail. I mean, this in a Sazerac or a Vieux Carré or an old fashioned just does pretty well. It marries well with the sugar or the brandy or whatever the case may be.
I love that. Just for people that are just popping in here, we're with Adam Spiegel, the founder and head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. We tasted the Sonoma Bourbon, and now we're on the Sonoma Rye. This one is 93 proof. It's 100% rye. Adam uses 80% rye and 20% rye malt to make this, and it's a phenomenal tasting rye whiskey. Really is.
Thanks.
Really appreciate the samples again. It's very
No,
nice.
man, I'm happy to do it. I mean, it's such an expanding world of people who are both sort of doing these sort of tastings and curating these things. You know, we started, you know, from the ground up. You know, it's like just like this podcast or this cast is going now. It's just like everything sort of starts small and you just work your way up. And as you start to get a social media following, it'll be amazing to see you develop as well too, because it's,
Sure, I
you know,
appreciate
if
that.
people sort of, yeah, as people start to get, you know, a love for bourbon and in particular other whiskeys, it just sort of goes. It's a very infectious thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you want to move to next?
Let's do the Cherrywood Rye. We'll stay in the rye family here.
Stay in the rye.
Yeah, you know, so the Cherrywood Rye. If you can find a bottle of this, I hate to say that I love all my children, equally because I really do, but it's probably fair to say that this one happens to get the best grades. Um, it's different and it's fun and it's meant to just be so so different. There's sort of this move in the rye whiskey category and the bourbon category to just sort of stick with what everybody else does.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make something that just felt like so incredibly different. So our cherrywood rye is 80% unmalted rye, 10% wheat, and then 10% cherrywood smoked barley. So we actually used to buy that barley from Breeze, and then we realized that we could go ahead and actually do that work ourselves.
So you're smoking this yourself in-house?
Looks like a connection got lost, but yes, we
Sorry,
are smoking our own grade.
yeah, you froze up there for a second.
Sorry.
No worries. So you were saying that you smoke this yourself in-house.
Yes, we smoke it ourselves. I'm sorry about the roundabout here, but yeah, so we
No
have our
worries.
own smoker. We took an old shipping container, turned it into a smoker, and we can smoke about a ton a week. So we do that using California cherry trees. So it actually gives you a little bit of terroir from the tree. You get some solidity and saltiness from it. The rye gives you the spice of the rye. I was kind of trying to make a Manhattan with grains. So
That's
it's
neat.
80-10. That wheat gives you some nice vanillins.
Yeah, I don't know that I know of many ryes that are using wheat in the mash bill.
Wheat or smoked ingredients either. I mean, to me, the marrying of smoked ingredients just makes a lot of sense, but it certainly is fairly unique to be able to do that.
Wow, it's
Yeah.
got just an amazing aroma to it. I mean, obviously you definitely get a bit of the smoke, but there's like dried figs or something even in the aroma.
Yeah, red sort of like chutney, cherry, stone fruit is still present, but you get that smoke, and the smoke is meant to be more on the finish. So it's really supposed to be sort of a lingering as time goes on. You sort of digest it and taste it, and you're like, oh, there it is. Sort of on the back of
Yeah.
your teeth is the best way I like to think of it.
All right, well, cheers. Gonna give this a try. Yeah. Wow. I almost tasted like brandy.
I've heard that. I've also heard people who love rum sort of like it too. It has this really sort of like back.
Yeah, you're back. So yeah, I mean, a rummy, brandy, cherry, even like a nutty flavor in there. Really, really interesting flavor profile for sure. And again, the long finish. And you're right, like the smoke coming in at the back of the palate towards the end of the finish. Really some complexity to this for sure. Great job, man.
Yeah, I'm trying to make this sort of like thank you. My goal is really to make this be just like a really sort of like easily digestible, approachable whiskey. Even with all of the nuance that's in there, the goal is just to have it be slightly different.
It's definitely you're achieving that for sure. I mean,
Thank you.
a lot going on. Dried fruits, nuts, like that brandy and rum, even some cherry flavor coming in towards the end, and just a nice, long, extended finish. Really
Yeah, I hope you enjoy that
interesting.
one. Please continue
Yeah.
to drink that one. Again, I think it's something that continues to sort of go with things, and you know, put that with some, as a good after dinner drink. I like to pair it with like a good pork, I really like a boar ragu, a venison with it. There's something a little different.
Man, really interesting. I like it a lot. Really, really good. Oh, and you even have, I don't know if people can see this, but there are some tasting notes right there on the label. I didn't realize that. That's cool. I like that. And so this guy comes in at 90, a little bit higher proof, 95.6 proof. And man, really nice flavors.
Thank you.
So,
So last thing on the list
should,
would be our cherrywood smoked bourbon. Please feel free to try it. It's the newest batch we've made. It comes out every fall, so everyone should sort of expect that every fall I'll release this product. It's
okay.
really meant to be this sort of like more like smoky liaison for people who like smoky scotches. Like it has a bit more smoke on it. So it was actually the original smoke we used to use. So it's 67% corn, 20% rye, 13% cherrywood smoked barley.
Okay, so this is, oh yeah, okay, so 67% corn, 20% rye, 13% cherry with smoked barley. Okay,
I'm gonna open my little bottle as well.
so this is a nice high rye bourbon.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful color. They all have a really nice color to them. So Adam, talk to me a little bit about your aging process. Like, what's your feeling on age statements and all that kind of thing? Because
I
I
mean, to
mean,
me, I feel like when. Hmm?
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, sorry. I mean, what I'm usually telling people is that when the whiskey's done, it's done.
Yeah.
There's the distinct difference between an old whiskey and a done whiskey, because your whiskey can be done but not be super old, or it can be old and done. And so
Sure.
that's sort of the balancing act that we play, especially in the craft world. And so for me, you know, a 15-gallon barrel, which is the smallest barrel I use today, though that's sort of going the way of the dodo, and that can go no more than 2 years. By about
Okay.
2 years, it's too oaky. It gets to start to sort of balance too much of the oak tannins flavor. And so the thing one, 4 years, though I have some that have gone closer to the 4 than the 2. And then the 53s I don't touch yet.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you got all that. You get
So
all
you
that?
have, yeah, yeah. So the 15s are 2 years tops. 30 is maybe a little over 2 years,
Yes.
and then the 53s you have not touched.
Yep.
So you have stock in 53-gallon barrels just sitting right now, and about how old are they right now?
I mean, I have some that are 4 and 5 years old. I have some that's younger. I kind of call them my scouts for letting me
Yeah,
know what it tastes like as it gets older and done. And the
yeah.
double barreling process really helps with that too.
So tell me about like what's your process of going through and tasting these and then determining when they're ready? Obviously, I'm sure it's different for each one, for each expression that you're doing, and depending on the barrel. But so are you
Hmm.
tasting like at uh, you know 6 months, then 12 months, then 18 months? Do you have like a specific schedule like that you're constantly going back to these and tasting?
Yeah, so lucky for me, I mean, since I've been doing it for a little while, I kind of appreciate and know the life cycle of these barrel sizes a bit more regular now. So
Yeah.
I used to spend so much time evaluating barrels that were nowhere near done. But now that I sort of have a regimen in place, it's easier for me to understand in, sort of 6 month blocks where things are in their development.
Yeah.
And it is to a certain extent. I mean, I have one kid now. I have another one coming in September.
Oh,
Um,
congratulations.
Thank you. So like herding cats and sort of trying to get everybody to like pay attention and stand in the line. And my daughter's going to preschool, so like the idea of of having these children all stand in the line is very indicative of barrels. Barrels are very similar to things. There are two barrels that are same barrel size, same char levels, sitting next to each other on a rack, and they are nowhere near both done. One is
Yeah.
in one place of its development, one's in another place of its development. And so part of my job is to sort of herd these cats and have them all line up at the right time. And so ideally identifying where these things are at in their development is a big task. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
that's sort of been some of my development over the better part of the last 10 years, was really just identifying where a whiskey is in its own internal development. What does it need to get there? Is it ever going to achieve it in that existing barrel, or does it have to be pulled and rebarreled or redumped? There's three things that have to get considered during that time.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to consider. Are you then blending, say, something that's a bit younger with, I'll just throw out a number just for an example, like an 18-month with something that's maybe been in the barrel for over 2 years. Are you doing stuff like that too, to kind of bring things together and make a batch? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm doing a lot of that. I'm also doing it for the anticipation of a 15-gallon barrel being done, a 30-gallon barrel being not done.
Sure.
It's all about the whiskey sort of coming up to the top of the hill at the right time. And that's part of the sauce of it. Like when you go to make your tomato sauce at home, you probably have a general recipe you use to make your tomato sauce. But in the end, you're still going to add a little bit of salt, a little bit of pepper, a little bit of oregano. And what
Sure.
you do at the end is all that's sort of in the margins. And that's part of what we do day in and day out, is just identify what are the little things I need to do to make my blend just a little different and a little bit better.
I love that, and I love that analogy. That's a great analogy. Very cool.
Well, it's all yours. You can take it.
Well, all right. So this guy on the nose, I'm getting a lot of a lot of cherry on the nose.
Yeah. Yeah. The goal is to be a lot more cherry, a lot more smoky forward. Some of the bottle resting helps with this too. It sort of mellows it out a little bit as well. But, imagine this poured over ice cream. Imagine this over Thanksgiving or Christmas. We do a lot of sales overseas, so I hear a lot of times people talking about like figgy puddings and bread puddings and stuff like that. I mean, just marrying this with something, creme brulee, something with some caramelized sugar in there, you really can't go wrong.
Wow,
Or
man.
a good cigar. Depends on what kind of day you catch me on, but a good cigar, I won't say no.
This is really, really nice. I could definitely I'm gonna find a big bottle. You're distributed in Chicago.
We are, yeah. We're with Breakthrough out there. We distribute in Vinny's has been a great store of ours out there for a while now, so you can certainly find our products out there. And they do a lot of shipping too, so that really helps. We're only in about 7 states, so we're small. We like to keep it small for a while.
Someone asked before if you're in Kentucky. Are you in Kentucky?
Years and years ago, we actually pulled out of the state just because we weren't really prepared to adequately sort of do it.
Yeah.
When the time's right, we'll definitely come back. I look forward to it because I loved just traveling around there and doing tastings and tours and actually trying going to Four Roses and seeing my friend at Willett and all sorts of stuff. So the answer is soon. We're just not there at the moment, but I look
Yeah.
forward to getting back into Kentucky again.
This is really another. So that first sip is still going on. I don't know what you're doing to create these finishes like this, but really there is a just extremely long finish on each one of these. And so what this one is, okay, also 95.6 proof on this one as well.
Yeah, it drinks better there. It's like, I learned a little bit of my proofing from Dave Pickerel.
Oh,
May he rest in peace.
yes.
Dave Pickerel always said, proof something to just enough where you feel a little bit of the burn, but not overbearing. And then it gives the drinker any number of flexibilities to be able to do what they want with it. And so I was like, you know what, that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like each one of these is really well balanced, like really smooth drinking, like obviously very easy to drink neat, and like you've been saying, each one of these I think is super flexible where you could put these into any number of cocktails for sure.
Right.
So kudos to you for creating something that's like that flexible and can do so many things.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I look forward to sharing more of our expressions as we have stuff that comes out. I will certainly keep you on a list. It's incredibly fun for me. I
I
love
love
being
it.
able to be, and every once in a while I'll mess around with on the cherrywood rye and the cherrywood smoked bourbon. I'll do a port barrel finish. We have a local port maker I work with every once in a while. So imagine sort of that sort of viscousy, sugary back end does really well.
Yeah,
Cognac finished. Sauterne was another one I worked with recently. So
I mean, this is just, I mean, to be honest, I feel like this one is maybe my favorite out of the four. All amazing, but this one was like, wow, really, really interesting. And I feel like it's a cherry bomb on that second taste. Lots of cherries, followed by like a little bit of that smoke, and then again those like a baking spice in there as well. Really, really nice.
yeah, thank
Really
you.
nice.
Yeah, I love it too, and it will always have a place in our lineup. It's especially as we get into the fall of every year. It just says Christmas to me. So
It does.
I'm happy. Yeah,
This is
it
this
really
is a
does.
this is an excellent fall drinking whiskey right here.
Yeah.
Adam, so tell me a little bit about like what else do you have in the works? Like, do you have anything that you're? I know you mentioned the single malt before. Are you working on any other things that you have in barrels that are going to become something down the line that you can talk about, or
Well, I mean, so I think thing one would be have everybody follow us at Sonoma Whiskey. I mean, we
absolutely?
definitely launch stuff there. We show people stuff there all the time. The other thing I would mention is that, as we go to do things in the future, come by the tasting room. I mean, I know it's not down the road, especially from Chicago, but you know, we do have tours and tastings. We're starting up a whiskey club again. So it'd be really fun to let people try some seasonal releases and stuff that we don't really release to the general public. So that's exciting. But I think single malt, the wheat whiskeys, the black truffle rye, these are all sort of things I can sort of throw out there into the market. It's not going to make a huge impact, but it can be something that people can try and really love.
That's really cool. So for everyone that's come in sort of towards the end here, this is Adam Spiegel. He's the founder and head distiller at Sonoma Distilling Company. We just went through a tasting of four of his whiskeys that he generously provided these really cool samples. And by the way, I really do like your labeling. Really sharp,
Thank you.
really nice looking. It's kind of like an old like faded, like these ones especially, kind of like a little faded kind of look to the label, kind of old West style maybe. Really cool, nice
Yeah,
labeling.
thanks. We designed a lot of these ourselves initially. When I first started off, we had a home baked design. And then as time went on, it sort of, we always used to call it the Mr. Potato Head. All the labels were not matching up, and you've got supposed to be, and it needed work. So we worked with a company about 2 years ago called Makers and Allies, and they're based in San Luis Obispo, and they did an absolutely phenomenal job. They knocked it out of the park. They took a lot of the motivations I took in making whiskey and made it into a label. So I'm glad they're translating well.
Well, I do have to say, okay, so initial impression when you look at the label, it's beautiful, and that's great and everything. You know, this will get people's eyes on the bottle for sure. But I mean, what's inside the bottle is you're doing a great job. This is really phenomenal. All four of these are like pretty much like nothing else I've had. Really unique flavor profiles, unique aromas. And I think would make excellent cocktails out of any one of these. I'm more of a neat guy, and these are all fantastic neat, but I could see these going in cocktails or pairing these with food would be really amazing. You've got a good thing going there.
Thanks. Well, come check us out. We'd love to have you. It'd be great to have any of the viewers who see this come on out as well. I mean, we are an open book. We try and be as transparent as possible. You know, non-GMO grains, organic grains, like we give a crap. So I think it's really important that people sort of get a sense of who we are, and they can come see us here in Northern California anytime.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. As a consumer, I love like knowing the mash bill. I love that you put these tasting notes on the bottles. Really cool. Thank you, Adam, very, very much, especially for the samples and for taking your time to come on and talk with me and kind of run through these with me and give all of that really, really cool information. There's a lot of people that have commented on here. I don't know if you've seen, but a lot of people have really been appreciative of like all of the knowledge that you've shared with us tonight. So it's really cool.
Good. Yeah, I'm really glad it worked out. And honestly, at the end of the day, thanks again for the time, and keep on drinking, enjoying stuff. And you know, I also consume other people's products as well. So I really do enjoy and appreciate actually trying new things. So I'm glad you liked what we're making here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Let's stay in touch and have a great rest of your week.
You as well. Cheers, all. Thank you very much.
All right. Cheers, Adam. All right, guys. So that completes the tasting tonight of the Sonoma Distilling Company whiskeys. Really, really fun. That was the first time that I've had somebody on here from a distillery, and to have the founder and to have the head distiller on to talk about each of these whiskeys was absolutely incredible. I had such a good time. I hope that you guys had a good time. Adam provided so much really, really cool information about his thought process that went into making each of these. And if you get a chance, if you can find Sonoma Distilling products in your state, or if you have a buddy that can get them for you, check these guys out. They're making really, really unique whiskey out of Sonoma, California. Really good stuff, really interesting guy, and a great distillery. So good night, guys. Have a great night. Hope you enjoyed this. Take care. Peace. Hey everybody, what's going on? It's Chris, the Urban Bourbonist, live here in Chicago. I'm underneath an umbrella right now. It's raining. I'm out walking the dog. There's Mr. Nuts in his yellow rain slicker. We're out on our evening walk. I'm underneath the umbrella. It's not raining too hard, but it's raining here. And I just wanted to check and see if you guys had a chance to see my live tonight with Adam Spiegel from Sonoma Distilling Company. It was an absolutely epic live video and tasting with the founder and the head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. We went through a tasting of 4 of the Sonoma Distilling Company whiskeys, their bourbon, their rye, and then a cherrywood smoked rye and a cherrywood smoked bourbon. And I'll tell you, I'm not saying this just because I received samples from them and had the founder of the company on. The aromas and flavor profiles of those 4 whiskeys were seriously like nothing else that I've tried. They're doing some really, really unique things at Sonoma Distilling. Their bourbon was a wheated bourbon. Their rye is 100% rye. Then their cherrywood smoked rye also had wheat in the mash bill, so it's like a wheated rye. And then they had a cherrywood smoked bourbon. Really, really making excellent stuff. Just a small craft distillery in Sonoma County in California. If you missed my live with Adam, go to my stories. The live video is there. It will be there for the next 24 hours, and I'm trying to figure out a way to record that video so that I can put it on IGTV so that it's there forever for people to watch. But check it out. Really, really epic tasting and interview with the founder and the head distiller of Sonoma Distilling Company. The first time I've had someone on, an owner or a distiller like that on my Instagram page. So it was really a unique opportunity to talk to someone like that, and that's sort of the direction that I hope to take the page. I want to do more things like that and talk to people in the industry that are actually making or actually own a distillery. So I have a few other things lined up coming up here in the future, which should be interesting. Sorry it's so dark here, but I'm underneath an umbrella. It's raining as I'm out with the dog. There's Mr. Nuts in his yellow rain slicker. So on Wednesday night, guys, I have another really, really fun and exciting thing coming to the Instagram Live. I'm going to be on with, if you're familiar with St. Cloud Bourbon, they did one batch so far. It was like something like 3,000 bottles, maybe. Really small batch. There was a lot of hype around them, and I happened to get one of their bottles. This is St. Cloud Bourbon that I'm talking about, and I did a tasting with Landon from the Brothers Bourbon, and we both liked it. We thought that there were some flaws in the bourbon. It didn't have a real long finish. It was a little pricey, but we did actually both enjoy it, and we're happy that we made the purchase and have it in our collection. And since we opened that, and since I did that live with Landon, I've revisited that bourbon a couple times, probably 2 or 3 times, and it's really, really, it's gotten a lot better as it's been open and as some air has been on it, and the finish is improved. The flavors are all amplified. And so anyway, on Wednesday, the plan right now, still needs to be confirmed, but the plan right now is to have Ray Walker, who is the founder of St. Cloud Bourbon, on for a live. I'm going to do the same thing that I did tonight with Adam from Sonoma Distilling. I'm going to ask Ray a few questions about his background, like how he got into whiskey. He's a former winemaker, actually. And we're going to taste batch 1 of the St. Cloud Bourbon together on Wednesday night. So Ray